Now I have the fuel injection manifold. What I've done in the back here in between is, as long as I could reach it more easily, I've connected the oil pressure sensor, the oil pressure switch, the EGR line, run the cables up here that came out of that wiring harness. And then this assembly goes in. With this, I've oiled the O-rings and I've oiled the ports so they slide in easier. I didn't put new O-rings on them. These parts have only been in the car for a very short period of time. Just a handful of hours of runtime, like 3 hours of runtime. So I think they've not heat aged or anything. So let's see if we can tuck these guys back in their holes. You can hear them all snap down with a satisfying little pop. And they all rotate freely. And these fasteners, because they go into aluminum, I've also put anti-seize on them from the last time around, and there's still plenty of it there. Then these guys get run down. The big bolt uses a 45, this one uses a T40. Just enough different to keep things interesting. Leave that loose for the moment. Try to get the other ones down. One thing I'll have to remember to do is, there's a fitting on the back here for the cold start injector. I had to loosen it up, because that injector swings around and drops in down below here when you put in the runner, that middle runner unit, or what would you call it, left-hand front runner unit. I'm just going to snug these down for the moment. I need to go back and double check the torques back on them. I don't have it right at my disposal. My memory is it's 15. It means I'll have to get out my smaller torque wrench. But that's okay. I'll do that. There's a bolt, a 9/16 headed bolt. Goes in the front here. Flex the lines a little bit. And it holds the lines to the manifold. Good old 9/16. Chevy guys made sure that most of the things on this engine were 9/16 heads. Water pump, they're all 3/8" bolts. Not everything, but many of them, until they started inventing Torx fasteners, but okay, I need to get the torque spec for that and for those guys. But that's how you put the fuel injection manifold on. Now, next sort of is to do the runners and plenum. But what I learned in the first go around is that if you get the plenum on, you can't get the filler neck on properly. It's hard, you can't get a torque wrench on it because the plenum's over it. So I'm going to change up, and right now everything's covered. So what I'm going to do is wait to put the plenum on. What I want to have is, because the thermostat's in here, I want to make sure that I have the block filled to the top with coolant, and then put the thermostat in. I did this before, because when you go to break the cam in, you really don't want having big air bubbles in here. So what I did before, and I will do again, is fill the block, put in the thermostat and the filler neck, then I can put the plenum on, plenum and the runners, and then I will finish filling different parts of the cooling system and the radiator. Try to bleed it all out and pressure check it so I know that when I go for the first fire, that I know that I have enough coolant and it shouldn't overheat. That's all for now. At this stage I'm still installing accessories and torquing braces. I need to get that done so I can fill the engine block. So I'm rapidly going around here with the challenge is figuring out where all the braces go and how they all fit together. In the V-belt days, fitting accessories together was a challenge, and you had lots of brackets. In the modern days with serpentine belts and constant load tensioners, it makes it a lot easier. This car is actually one of the first ones that had a serpentine belt, but they didn't have a tensioner. And so, being that it didn't have a tensioner, you just leaned on the belt like a V-belt and torqued it down. It was not the best. Another interesting thing, I've been in the auto business. I worked in the auto business and engineering for a long time. And actually when GM started to go metric, I worked for a supplier to GM. And you find out a number of different things. The interesting thing was the conversion to metric. So when you're working on one of these cars, one of the things to kind of keep an eye on is that you're working on a car that's part metric and part English. And we had there were innovative ways in the business of making that work. So pretty much the rule at the end of the 70s, the rule was that parts that bolted to the car had to be metric. But legacy parts themselves didn't have to be metric. Now that sounds weird, but what it means is that the engine didn't have to be converted all to metric. So all the fasteners on the engine could still be 9/16ths. But things that got assembled in the assembly plant all had to be metric. So right now, this was a 9/16 inch fitting. The one I just torqued is a 15 millimeter nut with a 3/8 inch 16 thread. So it's going to the engine, which is traditional. So you'll find on these engines you'll have some really weird threads, and it tended to be who installed the part. If the plant installed the part in the vehicle assembly plant, it was metric. When I said I supplied to GM, I was doing brake boosters, and we used press-in studs. So the stud was metric, the nuts were metric, but the rest of my assembly hadn't been converted yet. interesting stuff. So I got that pencil brace on. This is loose. None of my accessories are torqued up yet because I want to put the belts on. But one of the things I've learned in doing this job is that you want to make sure that you get all the brackets torqued up, because once you start putting belts on, then you lose access for the torque wrench for some of the brackets. And and the next one after air conditioning is the air pump system that's sitting on the floor here. Here's the air pump system, which goes over on this other side of the engine. I have some of the brackets in place, but I know historically that a lot of people in the hot rod community tend to dispose of air pump systems. They really don't like them, and they think they ought to get rid of them because they'll get lots of free horsepower and things. I would advise, having been in the powertrain for a long time, that's not a great idea. Especially if you've done what you're supposed to do and retained the catalytic converter on the car. These pumps don't use a lot of energy. They do use some, but it's really not a lot. And most of the time when they're turned off, they don't use much of anything at all. But they protect your catalytic converters. One of the things they do is help unburn fuel before it gets down to the converter, which can cause it to that can cause your converter to overheat, and that's not a good thing to have happen. You really don't want a hot, overheated catalytic converter. On newer cars, we were able to eliminate them most of the time because the engine controls got more sophisticated, the OBD, and we had different ways of protecting the catalyst as we went down the road. Alright, going to just keep on clicking away at installing accessories and air pump tubes with the goal of getting the radiator in, the hoses hooked up, and the coolant filled.